Okay, good evening. We're up to Daf Ayin Aleph. We're up to the Mishnah, to, three lines from the top. Hu'umanim shel Yisrael. Take out the word shel. It doesn't make any sense because these are not speaking workers of Jews. It's speaking about Jewish workers. So the Bach takes out the shel. Hu'umanim Yisrael. Shesholach lehem oivit kichavim chavi shel yayin esech b'scharan. So we know yayin esech zase b'hana, and this person for their services went ahead and paid them with yayin esech. So the question is, can they take it as their wage or not? Mutta, right? It's mutta. So mutta loimaloi, it's mutta to say to them, Tain lanu estameha. Give us, they can't take the ayin esek because they can't use it. But they can say, give us the worth. So Pirish, guys, let's say the guys were owed $100 and they send them $100 worth of yayin esek. Now they can't take it because it's miyas v'na. But they can tell them, give us $100 in their stead, and it's not considered as if they're having a no from the yayin esek, taking the $100 instead of the yayin esek, because it never came to the rishus. They never made a kinyan; it wasn't theirs. So therefore, since it wasn't theirs, it's not like they're having a no from it. On the other hand, once it gets to the rishus, then it would be asabana. Says Rashi, muta loy malay tain lanu estamehab. They're like kanala because he didn't make a kinyan. Vu ein chayiv lehem elamois, and really he's only chayiv $100. V'tanya le'el Yisrael shenoisa boivit kichavim mana macha boivit kichavim bevi'olo yayin esech ve'uli muta. You know, as he sells it, the yayin esech to pay off the chayiv would be muta. So that's straightforward then. Pretty straightforward, something that we've seen before. Amar Rav Huda says the Gemara. Amar Rav. Amar Huda says the name of Rav. Muta la'adam boivit kichavim. A person is permitted to say to a guy, say, v'hafas alai menas hamelech. Go ahead and assuage, and kind of get off my head the king's tax. He could say that. Says Rashi, what's the chiddush? Say v'hafas alai menas hamelech. Arnoina. Arnoina was the head tax. Shayinoistim mitvoy sehem umivoy sehem. They would pay from their crops and from their animals, but they would pay a tenth. And v'Yisrael zeh shechayiv lasis lemelech yayin. He's a chayiv, let's say, for the but he has to give his wine. Go ahead and take that off my head. Even though the guy is going to give yayin esech, and you would think, therefore, it's like the Jew having hana from the yayin esech. Yisrael who parid the meha, and he's playing his chiyuv. Kivin the havimatzi l'sluke l'shlicha the malka bezuzei kiyav le'avi kechavim yayin esech lav shluchet Yisrael. In other words, when would it be a problem? The Jew sends the guy as a shliach to go ahead and do his job. Okay, sends a shliach. Then, if he's paying him more for yayin esech, he's having direct hana. But he didn't have to pay yayin esech. He didn't go to say go pay yayin. He said go pay off. So since he could go ahead and pay off his money, right? Then it's not a problem. So that's the chiddush. So I'm going to review them around. Save office alignment. Go ahead and pay off the king. And if he pays with yayin esech, it's not a problem, and he's going to reimburse the guy. Meisvei. Al yoim adam levi kichavim, oil tachti leoitzer. Go in my place leoitzer to be made for Rashi says the shaiter, the judge. Go ahead and be some type of tax. Go ahead and take my place. You can't do it. So the chayra. So he's asking on Rav. The Rabbi Yehuda name of Rav, you see, you can't do it. Amalei Rav, oil tachti loitzer kamit. You said the lashon, take my place. That is taking my place is the lashon of shlichus. Go in my place, and therefore, if you're going in my place and you're going to use yayin esech, I'm having hana. This case over here, where you said mutal adam to ovikachavim hefes says go ahead and hefes al menas melech is similar to elha aval oimelo. You can tell him. Malteni min ha'itzer, save me from the itzer. So depending upon what type of lashon you're using, it makes all the chilik in the world. If you say take my place, it's a shlichus, then you're having enough yayin esech. If you say go ahead and take it off my head, right, then it's different. Let's see Rashi over here. Oil tachti la'itzer. Rashi says hichnis b'mekaymei lahafes es ha'shaiter k'moizer yotzer miatzmi. Okay. Next Rashi, oil tachas kamit, kivin damalei oil tachti. Since he said the lashon of oil tachti, right? Oil tachti mashma. Take out the word have. Since you said the word oil tachti mashma, it's my place. Have you b'mkomi? V'chol my diyav le'oiv kechavim, and anything the guy gives, havikilu yav Yisrael. It's like the Yisrael gave it. Dabim komahu. So it's like the Yisrael going ahead, giving the yayin nesach, and you're having enough from the yayin nesach. So that you can't go in and ask on this case. Hadar of Yehuda's din that it says mutal lahafis as the melech leidami elo l'seifa. What does the seifa say? Avol omaloi malteini min ha'oitzer. You could say the lashon of malteini min ha'oitzer. The efshel isluke bezuzeh, because it's possible to go ahead and use zuz. So once it's used zuz and it uses yayin, then it's not having a no. Hilkach l'meisav l'chamer lav shluchehu. He's not a shliach. He's a shliach. Lav dafka to give the wine and mela what it would be permitted. Says the next Mishnah. Okay, just as a guy that has a hakdama, we're familiar with the parsha of kinyanim. We're familiar with there's a parsha in the Torah. David, you want to move over a second so I can see you? It's good. You don't have to hide. It's not good now. So good. We have the parsha of kinyanim. Now we have a big machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yochanan, and Reish Lakish. If Mois is kaina, right? Reish Lakish says that midaraisa it's not kaina, Mashiach is kaina. He simchu yimchu himself kaina biyad himself. Don't need them biyad, right? And Rabbi Yehuda says no. Rabbi Yochanan says no. That Mois is kaina, and that it's not kaina that you require another kinyan is midrabanan, right? So we're familiar with the kinyan of Mashiach, where someone brings something into his rishus. The shaila at hand will be what's the din by a goy vis-a-vis Mashiach? What's the din by a goy vis-a-vis Mashiach? Can a goy be kind of a Mashiach or not? That seems to be a machlokes in the Gemara between Amema and Ravashi, and we're bringing it in within the venue of yayin nesach. What would the question be, fellas? If the goy is kinda the yayin nesach before payment, then you have a problem. If the goy, because the goy, in other words, if the goy is not kinda the yayin nesach, but it's yayin nesach before the kinyan, then you're selling him yayin nesach. So in the transaction, it's very important to make sure that the guy, right, either you get your money up front before the guy does anything, or that no kinyan takes place before you get your money. Okay, so it's very important. And the whole shaila for the rest of the daf is going to be whether Mashiach is kind of by the day. Okay, that's the basic format of the day. Says the Mishnah. Someone goes ahead and he's selling wine to a guy. So pasak, they come up with a price. They decide on a price. Actually, madad damav until he didn't go ahead. Actually, madad. If he comes up with a price before the medida, now in the medida, guys, there's going to be a kinyan. The assumption is the guy in the medida is somehow being kaina. Then dava mutarim, because since you decided on a price right beforehand, so the money is yours, and therefore you're not having enough from the ayin esech. However, madad actually pasuk damav. If a measurement takes place beforehand, and again, the assumption is when the guy is measuring it, he's being kaina, and then and only then are you getting the money, then you have a problem of yayin nesach. So you hear the key. The key is that you have to get your money before the guy makes the kinyan. Rashi. You go ahead and decide on a price. Until the measurement's done. Damav mutarim. The damav will be permitted. Mefarish b'gemara taima ikka. The mukila mishum meshicha by the kechavim, we go ahead and say meshicha by a guy, meshicha by a guy is kaina hilkach kishem moidad haina meshicha. When he measure it, that's meshicha. The kanya of the kechavim miyad, and now it's his. The havile Yisrael zuze gabe the kechavim behalva, and then he owes you money, so the money is alva. The yain esech lehabi ad nagabe. So the yayin esech is not until what? So in other words, when's it become yayin esech? In his rishus. So here, go through the form. Let's go. Here's the pecking order, guys. Look at me. Eye contact. Again, as long as it's not yayin esech before you get your money, you're pretty good. So here's the case. You're going ahead. You decide on a price. You measure it out, right? When he draws it right now at this period of time, who owns it? He does. Why? Because Mashiach is kaina. I didn't pay me yet, so now he owes me money. That's mitaras halva. If he does Mashiach, then he touches it, and it's yayin esech. In whose rishus is the yayin esech? The guy's rishus. Therefore, it's not a problem. I knew it would be clear afterwards. Yeah, that's the guys. That's the key. The key is that it's yayin esech by the guy, not by the yid. If it's yayin esech by the yid, you got a problem. Good, because then he's selling yayin esech. Okay. Um, let's finish the Rashi. Next Rashi. Modad ad shaloi pasik damav. If he measures it until a price has been decided, then asurim. The oivik lekavim loikanya b'mashicha. Since you didn't decide on a price, guys, his mashicha is not a kinyan. Guys, if I go into your rishus and do mashicha, it's a business transaction, right? In other words, so you didn't decide on a price, his mashicha is this kind of mashicha. It's not a mashicha. So therefore, the kivin delay pasik damav, since there wasn't a price that's set, loy samcha daita. He did act the mashicha, but he's not samich dash that the deal's going to go through since you didn't decide on a price. Hilkach ki nagaba, when he touches it afterwards, have a yayin nesech di Yisrael. It's the yayin nesech that belongs to a yid. For ika de mukila. Okay, and we'll see what the Gemara sets it on. Okay, so that's the main point. The kinyan over here is making it now. If he's kaina, it's his. So when he touches it, makes the yayin nesech, it's his. It's his, and therefore what? Therefore you're good. You're not having a no. On the other hand, if he touches it while you own it, then you're selling him yayin nesech, which will be asa. Which will be asa. Amar Amema, says Amema. Meshicha ba'ovid kechavim kaina. Meshicha by avodas kechavim is kaina. Rashi. Af agav lo yoav ovid kechavim demei Yisrael. Even he didn't pay yet, meaning it wasn't kaina mitaras kesa, fellas. Moshach minei kanya. The chen Yisrael mi ovid kechavim. It works both ways, right? It works both ways. Good. So even though usually, guys, if Mashiach is not kaina, what's kaina by a guy? Kesef. Right? Kesef is going to be kaina. Okay, so Amema says Mashiach ever become kaina. Teida, what's the raya? The Hani Parsoi, these Persians, Mishadre Pardashne L'Hadade, they send, Rashi learns they send gifts to each other, V'loi Hadre Behu, and they never return them. They're never going back on them. There's never going back on them. Says Rashi. Pardashni, Rashi says doirain, a gift. V'lehadri behu. Hasholchen never changed their minds. The one who sends it never changes his mind. Why? Alma. You know why he can't change his mind? Because it's not his anymore. Alma v'meshicha kaninu hamekablim. The one who's mekabel is what? Is mekabel meshicha. Fellas, you give a gift. You never ever see a guy give a gift and say backsies. There's no backsies. Why? Because it's not his anymore to be backsies. That's the raya Mema brings. Now the problem is he's bringing a raya from gifts. Bring a raya by Beka Chamemka. Lishna Achrina. Rashi brings a second lashon. Mechuvas Hagainim. Pirdashni. Misha Yeshloi Kur Chitim Limchar. A person has a kur of chitim to sell. Poisik domim lilokeach. He can go ahead and set a price. Poisik domim lilokeach. V'hoilich lebeisai, and goes home. U'meshagale kav chitim lirois kamen yafos. You send him a sample. V'ma'akiv lilokeach oisei kav etzloi, and if he keeps it, miskayim emekach. Then the deal, what is done? V'meina chafetz behen, and if he doesn't want v'meina chafetz behen machzir, then he'll go back on the deal. So it seems they go ahead, they send this Mekach Memka, and they don't return this item. So if you look at Taisvis says, Pardashni, Doiros V'lei Behu, Almo Kanyunu B'Mashicha. We see that, wow, when the Mishaleach never goes back on the deal, he's kind of. Lish Nachrim Meshuvah Sagainim, Pirish B'Kunchut, and now he has two words. He says, Ze'ika. The Lishna Kama Kani B'Matanahu. Who baloim the Mashiach kind of mekach memka? Why Tosfos had to say, fellas, that it's speaking, that it's like the second lashon is ikka, because I need a raya to mekach memka. It doesn't help me a raya as a gift. A gift doesn't seem to be a chiddush that is kaina. V'oimeri da afilu madiyama ain't a kaina karavashi b'samach. Even we can see on the Amid base, fellas, Ravashi says it's not kaina. Hani mili going the ikka kaspa. That's when there's kesef to make the kinyan. Fellas, if Mashiach is not kaina, what is kaina? Kesef. If you give a present and Mashiach is not kaina, what's kaina? So the same Mashiach's Kaina by Matana is not a raya because there's no other game in town. Aval b'mitziu matana. When you have a mitziu or matana, the leka kaspa kuli alma maided the kind of a Mashiach bagba. So Taisus says the whole thing, the whole Torah over here is speaking about Mekach Memkar. It's not speaking at all by a present. It's a good svara. In other words, when you say Mashiach is not kaina, obviously there must be another heikatim of how it is kaina, or else how you conducting business. So if you bring me a raya from Darain that's kaina, that's not going to be a raya that Mashiach is kaina, because there you have no choice. That's the only game in town. There is no other vehicle to go ahead and conclude the transaction. Okay, so therefore, and that's why Tosis had to like what? Had to like Rashi's second pshat, because the first pshat it wouldn't work. Geschmack Tosis. Okay, so so Amay Mizdin is that what that Mashiach is kaina, and he brings the raya from the Persians. Okay, Ravashi Amar, take out the words Loyal Memlecha. Ravashi Amar Mashiach Ba'Vekachav Meina kaina. He's disagreeing. He's disagreeing. No, Loyal Memlecha will mean that somehow we can change our Meima, that not being a raya from the Pashtani. For Haidli Hajibahu, and that the Makabel doesn't go ahead is not because he can't, but the Ramis Ruchahu, he's a Balgaiva, the Nikita Lahu. In other words, any person who gives a gift, you're not going back. You're not going back on the gift. It's not. You feel like a lowlife. You feel like nothing. So in other words, not that they didn't go back on the gift. It's not because they can't go back on the gift because it's not theirs anymore because Mashiach is kaina. That they don't go back on the gift is because how could I do that? I'm a cheapo, right? I give you a gift. So that's no raya. So in other words, Ravashi says his din. He argues on Meimar, and he tells Meimar that your raya you want to bring to the Persians is nishkan raya, is not a raya whatsoever. Okay, the next piece of Gemara, guys, very, very shakla. It's like really a tennis match. Half cup. I gave you a lot of information. It's going to be helpful. Ravashi, Mino Amin Allah. How do I know that Mashiach is not kaina? How do I know Mashiach is not kaina? Now, guys, here's what the Gemara thinks. The Jew, when he would sell the wine, he's a wine merchant. When he would sell it, he'd pour it in his own measuring cup. The guy would pick up the measuring cup and pour it into the guy's cup. So there's the barrel, guys. There's the barrel. There's the measuring cup of the Jew. The guy picks up the measuring cup and pours it into his. That's what the Gemara thinks right now. So now. Rav lahanu savyasa. Rav said to these moichrei wine. Savyasa, Rashi says, are yayin merchants. Ki kalisu. When you go ahead and measure out chamra lo'evdei kichavim, when you're measuring out wine for goyim, shaklu zuzim inayu. Be sure you take money first. Be sure you take money before you start measuring out. V'hoda kailan lahu. And then you'll go ahead what? And then you'll go ahead and measure. V'iloi nakita ba'adayu zuzi. And if the guy does not have money by him, oisvinu, lend him the money. V'hoda shekil minayu, and then take the money as a loan. Ki heichi that the havi halva gabayu, that it should be halva by you. So Rav is admonishing. That's not admonishing. I mean that's the right word. He's telling them unequivocally. Be sure you get the money before you measure it out. Because once you measure it out, we're going to begin a mechanism of a problem, and it's going to show that Mashiach is not kaina. Now, the loya vidu sachi, if you don't do that, ki kahave yayin esech b'shu saichu kahave. The wine's going to be in your rishus yayin esech. V'chi shakilsu d'me yayin esech shakilsu. And when you take the money, it's going to be yayin. You take the money, it's for yayin esech. Okay, so guys, now watch. Here's the assumption: you poured it out into your measuring cup. The guy picked it up, right? Now, if you're telling me the guy is kaina now, right? It's not a problem, right? It's not a problem. But what's the problem? Is the guy is not kaina now. He's going to take it and he's going to pour it into his kli, and then when he pours it into his kli, it's going to be yayin esech, and you don't get the money yet. And since he wasn't kaina, who owns the wine? You do, and you're going to be taking money for yayin esech. In other words, that intermediary step, that middle step over there, if you're not koina, the guy is not koina, it's your wine. If it's your wine and he's menasech it, then you're getting hana from yayin esech. So obviously over here, when Rav said it, right, it must be not koina. Because if you were koina, it'd be not a problem, right? Because it's yayin esech, he's koina. Who does it become yayin esech by? By the guy. And therefore, what? You're good. So, and therefore you should be able to get your money even afterwards. So that's Rav Ashi's beautiful raya that what Mashiach is not kaina. That's his raya that Mashiach is not kaina. V'isal kedaitach. And if you're going to say Mashiach by v'kechavim kaina, you're going to say Mashiach by a guy is kaina amid beis midemashcha v'kechavim. When the guy goes ahead and picks up the Jew's measuring cup, kanya, at that period of time, guys, he's kaina. Yayin esech lehavi ad nagabe. It's only yayin esech what when he touches it. So who's rishus to become yayin esech in? The guys. So therefore, it's not a problem. You can take money. So it must be fellas that what he's not kaina, and since he's not kaina when he touches it, it's in the rishus of the yid, and therefore the yid is having enough from what from yayin esech. How are we doing? You follow the steps? Okay, great. Now, we want to disprove Rav Ashi's proof, right? Guys, the Gemara is going to now disprove Rav Ashi's proof. Idika Kyle, for Rami Lamana di Israel, if it was speaking that you measured out and put it in the mana of Yisrael, hachanami, einachinami, the guy will be koina mishicha. Hachanami, it would be a good kinyan. If it was speaking like we thought, in other words, you thought it's speaking about it's the measuring cup of the yid, and the guy is picking that up and doing mashiach on that. If it was speaking about that case, hachanami, you're right. You wouldn't have to take the money beforehand because it's becoming yayin esech in the rishus of the guy because the guy was kaina. He was kaina b'mashicha. Leitzricha the kokayel v'rami lemonadai v'kechavim. He's not putting into a measuring cup of a yid. He's putting it from the barrel directly into what? The measuring cup out of the. And you know what's going to be in that measuring cup? Right? It's what's going to be in the measuring cup? Wine. Residue wine from the previous time. And therefore, my concern is it's going to become yayin nesach. Right? It's become yayin nesach. Good? So now, if it becomes yayin nesach and it's not his yet because he didn't make a kinyan, guys. In other words, watch what's happening over here. Guys, look, he's taking the wine. This is the guy's kli. He's putting it over here. The wine, the guy wasn't cleaning it yet. It's his kli. He wasn't cleaning it yet. We'll see why in a second. And now, since it's touching over here, wine. So this wine over here that you're selling him is yayin esech. Nimsa, if you didn't take money yet, you have a yayin esech problem. You sold him yayin esech. That's the Gemara. So in other words, you have no raya of Ashi from here that Mashiach is not kaina. Enochanami, if it was in the kli of the yid, Mashiach would be kaina. You would have a problem, and you can give the money later on. Here you're putting it directly into the kli of the guy, so it's becoming yayin nesech before the kinyan. If it's yayin nesech before the kinyan, meaning before the kinyan means it's still yours. If it's still yours, you got a problem. Now the Gemara mechanically is going to say, why don't you have a kinyan? Why the Gemara is mechanic? Why don't we say this kli somehow is kaina before it becomes yayin nesach? Guys, you hear? Again, once you get that little step, everything goes glad. I could say the following, fellas, look, as it goes from here into the kli, before it hits the wine, he's kaina. And then when it hits the wine, it's yayin nesach, after the kinyan.
What's the kinyan though?
What? Okay, what's the kinyan? Okay, very good shmak. We're going to get into that. That's the thing I sent out today. What exactly is the kinyan? Okay, we'll see. Great kasha. I didn't prompt him. I didn't even prompt you. Yeah, I know. Anyway, says the Gemara, Saif Kimata la'avira demana kanya. As soon as it reaches the ear space of the kli, before it becomes yayin nesech, it's kaina yayin nesech lihavi adamati la rasi demana. Okay, we'll see in a second, fellas, what the kinyan is. But you'd have to say shmamina when shmamina nitzak chibur. You'd have to say that that nitzak is a chibur. And if it's yayin nesech, right, that this was Heshi's problem the other day, it must say, you have to say, this is a shaila, whether nitzik is a chibur or not. You'd have to say over here that nitzik is a chibur, or else it's not yayin nesach because you kind of before. Says the Gemara, if he was holding it in his hands, there'll be no problem. If he was holding it in his hands, there won't be a problem to give the money. He'd be koina. However, it's speaking the monacha ara. And since the kli is on the ara, he's not koina. In other words, if he's holding it, I just want to go through the mechanics of the Gemara, and then we'll go through the pitch of the Kinyan, exactly. So, guys, the hierarchy, it has to be that the Jew gets the money before it becomes Yayin Nesach. Yayin, in other words, and if the guy makes a Kinyan before it becomes Yayin Nesach, everything's great. If the guy does not make a Kinyan before it's Yayin Nesach, then it becomes Yayin Nesach from the Yid. So Rav Ashi wanted to say, since it's speaking that the Jew took his wine, put it into a Jewish kli, and the guy was mashachit, right? It's still a problem. It's because his Mashiach wasn't a Kinyan. If his Mashiach wasn't a Kinyan, it belonged to the Jew. If it belonged to the Jew, you have a problem. Therefore, make sure you get your money first. Says the person that, now, who was speaking to Rav Ashi? I guess, who was speaking to Rav Ashi? What? No, it doesn't say who was speaking. It doesn't seem to say. Rav Ashi said, maybe to a Meimar. It could be he could speaking to a Meimar. Anyway, so they said to Rav Ashi, if it was speaking about the kli of a Jew, you'd be right. There was no Kinyan. You'd have a raya. But it's not speaking about the kli of a Jew. It's speaking about the kli of a guy. So when you put it into the kli of a guy, right? When you put into when you put it into what in the keli of a guy, there was no Kinyan, right? Because he didn't do any Mashiach. So he didn't do any Mashiach, there's no Kinyan. It becomes Yayin Nesach, and who's Rishus? The Jews Rishus. So therefore, you have no Raya. Fred the Gemara, why putting in the Kli do you say for sure there was no Kinyan? Why don't we say when it hit the airspace of the Kli, you were Kaina? Right? Why don't you say when you hit the airspace of the Kli, you were Kaina? Right? And what's the Kinyan? We'll see the Kinyan of Hagbah. And so the Gemara says, you're right. If you were holding that, you'd be correct. But you weren't holding that. Shma min onitzich chibur. That's Yayin Nesach. Says, lo, you have no raya. You'd have no problem. You wouldn't have to give the money because the guy is koina before it becomes Yayin Netzach. But however, what's it speaking? The manachara. You're putting in the kli of a guy. You're putting in the kli of the guy, and he didn't make a kinyan. Since he's not holding up, it's no kinyan. Fred the Gemara v'tikn like halaf. Why doesn't the kli work as kinyan chatzar? Right? And if the Gemara shmam, you know, kalev shalakech b'shus meichel loikana. There's a shaila in Gemara and Bamitzia. The kalev of the person that's acquiring it, the kalev loikech and the b'shus and a meicher is the kaino or not. Meaning, guys, my kli that is mine, maybe it has to be in a neutral rishus or in my rishus, but not in the other guy's rishus. And there's a shaila. So over here we can say the fact that it's on the ground, the wine's going in. You got a problem of yayin nesech. Why? Because the guy's going to touch it afterwards. That the kli wasn't kind of the wine. It still belongs by the yid. So we bring a raya that the kli of the lekeach was just in a meichel lekeina lekeach. Says going loy lekeach lekeach. V'achamei askinan ki going the ikka akeves yayin apume. There is some type of strainer at the top, some type of kli at the top. The kuzanta of the kuzanta is some type of a kli. The kamakame in nasichle. As what happened was, it becomes yayin nesach at the top before it gets into the kli. So guys, it's becoming yayin nesach at the top. In other words, it's a guy's kli, but the guy's kli on the top has an area that still had yayin nesach around it, so it never got to the airspace of the kli. So you have no raya about kinyan chatzah, kinyan hagbah, whatever it's talking about. You have no raya. At the top of the kli, it's becoming yayin nesach, and then it's dripping into come on. The like Reb Shimon Gamliel, it's not like Reb Shimon Gamliel. The Reb Shimon Gamliel, Yimach Kulu Evikechav, and Chutzim Yayin Nesach Shabai. Reb Shimon Gamliel is of the opinion if you have Yayin Nesach dripping in, you mix it together, you sell it. Let's say you have 10 to 1, and the one is Yayin Nesach, so you go ahead and sell 9. Okay, that's what you do. So over here, when he asks the whole thing, we're saying that Wadi doesn't hold like that. Says the Gemara. So it's a kasha. It must be command like Rishon Gamliel. Rishon Gamliel, he said you should be able to sell it, and Rav said it's asa. Says Midu time el Rav. Who do we have to fatay? Should we have to answer Rav? Hama Rav Allah Rishon Gamliel when chavias bechavias. When does Rishon Gamliel say you sell a chutzim yayin esach? You have 10 barrels. One of them's yayin esach. So you go ahead, take 9, and throw the value of the 10th one. You throw that in the river. But when it's mixed together, yayin b'yayin, he doesn't hold like that. So Mamela, if it's speaking in a case where the wine is on top, it's going in yayin nesech, you have no raya. You have no raya, Rev Ashi, that Mashiach is not koina because there was no kinyan over here. And now, guys, the Gemara is that's the shakatari of the Gemara. The Gemara asked the kasha when it hits the ear space, there should be koina. Mitam what? What kinyan is ear space? Says Rashi. Okay, that's the monadoiv de kichavim. The yain shebekli oisroi, the yain that's in the kli asif. Avi yain esech becoming mashicha, it becomes yain esech before mashicha. Fred the Gemara, let me say it becomes the goys before mashicha, before yain esech. Guys, how's it possible to be the goys before yain esech? Midimote leavira de mana. It hits the ear space of the mana. The oiv kichavim kanya, that the oiv kichavim is kaina. Oiv kichavim behagba. So, guys, he's holding it. Get this straight, guys. Guys, look at me. Guys, look at me. Guys, look at me. Here's what we want. We want the kinyan to take place before yayin esech. Then it belongs to the guy. We want the kinyan to take place before it's yayin esech, so it belongs to the guy. So you're telling me there's no mashicha because it's the kli of the guy in the first place. As soon as it hits the ear space of the kli, the guy is kaina. It only becomes yayin esech when it hits the bottom. Good. So what kinyan is the airspace? Says Rashi, it's hagba. Hagba usually means you lift it up 3 amps. You do an action, right? Okay, so that's the discussion I wanted to bring in. I sent it out. Take a look at your phones. Give you the hard copy. Kopiala. Rashi Kosav Shanachri Koines Yayin Bagba. Okay, this is the paraphrase from the Sefer of Shirei Yom from Michal Zilbai. So it's the paraphrase. Rashi writes that the kinyan is kinyan Hagba. The Hiksha Taris Chaim, our favorite Achron, Taris Chaim is Eza Hagba Hizu. Kishagia Yayin La'aver. What kind of Hagba is where the Yayin reaches the ear space? Kol Zman Shlei Hunach Bekli. What kind of kinyan is it? Gets into the ear space before it gets to the bottom of the kli. What kind of kinyan is that? Umefarish Taris Chaim. When it says Hagba, it does not mean the kinyan of Hagba. It's the kli that's being kaina, but only because it's elevated off the ground. It doesn't mean the kinyan Hagba. It means the kli was in a state of Hagba. Fellas, you hear? It's not pshat that you did a kinyan Hagba. It's pshat that the kli was in a state of Hagba, that it wasn't on the ground, it was lifted up. That's what Rashi means. V'hainu mishum shekaimelon, kelev shel adam koineloi besimta. The kelev of a person to be koina a simta is an alleyway that doesn't belong, no jurisdiction of Rosh Hashanah. V'sheyesh lei b'shus laniach shames hakli, because you have rishus to put your kli down there. So the keli is koina when it's a rishus. Ubenimsa kli b'shus meicher. But when the kli is in the rishus of the meicher, like this now, it's in the keli in the rishus of the meicher yayin. His stopping hagemara b'baba basra hayam hakli koina oiloi. If the kli is koina or not, that's the gemara's mesupik whether keli shall like hayach koina b'shem meicher or not. This v'asafiku haim hakli botel legabe rishus, and therefore it cannot be koina. Guys, if my kli is in your rishus and it's batli rishus, so there's no kinyan. Guys, what's the kinyan? It's going from your jurisdiction to my jurisdiction. If it goes ahead and stays in your jurisdiction, I'm not kaina. So if my kli is in your rishus and it's batli your rishus, you put the kli down in your rishus. I mean, you put whatever the object you put in the kli, it's like you're putting in your rishus. Yeah, and then that's Vahani mili kishakli munach agabe karka. However, that shaila is only when the kli is on the ground. Then it's a shaila. Aval kishu munach biyad lekeach, when it's in the hands of the lekeach, ain't a batal rishus hamoicher. V'koine sayayim bekelav mishum shehu rishusai. Guys, it's like shtika like a kinyan chatzah. You're putting in his rishus. When do we say there's a shaila whether the keli of lekeach is koine rishus hamoicher is only when it's on the ground? Of course, you have a shaila whether you loses what. Its whole jurisdiction it's part of the moicher, or it's yours. If it's yours, you're kaina. If it's not yours, you're not kaina. But when you're lifting it up, then it's your rishus, like in a simta where you have rishus to put it down. Memela, the Toras Chaim wants to learn when Rashi said hagbah, it doesn't mean hagbah, the kinyan hagbah. It means it's off the ground. It's nice lumdis. Because of sheyesh litchayk es after Rashi, we can go say that's Pshan Rashi. Hagbah shekosav, when he writes hagbah, ain't kavanasei lekinyan hagbah. His kavanah is not for the kinyan hagbah. Ela kishemagbia es hakli, when you lift up the kli, who koina sayayim machmash hakli nimsa etzlei b'shuslei. V'koina leikela boifin zen. This way be koina. V'yaf b'chedushi aran mavur shekavanasei gemara ledin kinyan chatzer. V'chiach mikan she'ave kli koina kemunach b'kli. That an avra of a kli is munach like kli, it's like a chatzah. So that's the Toras Chaim's chiddush, and that's why it works. Kimatzo, guys. So when Rashi said kinyan hagbah, it means that what? That this kli is capable of being koine kinyan chatzah because it's in a state of hagbah. That's the way Toras Chaim's learning. Okay, the Ritva disagrees. Harifva sava shekavanas hagemara lekinyan hagbah. It is the kinyan hagbah. V'hiksha ketzad kona b'giul la'aver kli. How could you be koine kinyan hagbah when it reaches the airspace of the kli? But it ain't hagbah koine b'shem makoim b'loy maisa. The hagbah is not koine without an action. She'asa kigoyin. Guys, you'll all remember this. How are you koine an elephant? Kigoyin pil b'chavile zmurais. Right? You put him on a pile of zmurais. In other words, the act of him going up, you can't physically lift him up, but him going up, like you ever see the circus, the elephants go on those little things? Right. So that's the act, but you need an action. Shemailes hapil al zmurais. You put the elephant on the zmurais. Umiyashiv habidva shekivin she'avir shesoifa lenoya. Listen to this chiddush. Shekivin she'afir shesoifa lenoya choshev munach. The airspace of something that eventually will lead to it being on the floor of that something, we'll view it as it's on the floor already. Vim hoya noyach hoya kan hagbah. And if it was there, it would be considered hagbah. Why? Now, as it's falling in, he's making sure the kli is straight. In other words, he's learning that it is a kinyan hagbah. What's the kinyan hagbah over here? Guys, how do you lift the wine? Guys, watch. Look. This is the kli. When it hits the airspace, I have to make sure. Now, when it's in the airspace, I'm going to view it as on the ground already, as if it's lifted up. But I have to make sure it gets in there. My act of holding it straight, yasher, to make sure it gets in there, that is the maisa of hagbah. So it's not lifted up yet. Since it gets to the airspace, we'll consider it lifted up because it's kemunach dami. So just yotzim idvarenu. Guys, in our Gemara's shaila, we answered up exactly that it's speaking where the guy was holding the kli, and therefore, if he's holding the kli, he's koine it. If he's koine it, you don't have a problem. What's the kinyan? The kinyan, we said the airspace would be a kinyan hagbah according to Rashi. We're explaining that it's really a kinyan chatzar, and the hagbah is to make it that the kli should be considered or not a kli in the rishus of the moicher, right? Therefore, it's lifted up off the ground. Whereas the Ritva is learning, no, the airspace of the kli is mamash kinyan hagbah, and my act to make sure that it stays in there, that it goes in there, that's the maisa. Okay. Meisivei. We're going to ask now, guys, on a Meimer. A Meimer said that Mashiach is kaina. Right? We're going to ask on Meimer, who says Mashiach is kaina. Meisivei. Halokeach grutois min oivdei kechavim. Someone's buying metal shards. He's buying like a metal. scrap metal. That's it, scrap metal. And from Meravid Kechavim, Umatza ben Abayis Kechavim. And now he finds among, we had this Gemara earlier, if it sounds familiar, and he found it among the scrap metal, he found Abayis Kechavim. Imat Shaloi Nos and Mois, Mashach. If before money was given, there was an act of Mashiach, meaning the Jew, guys, the Jew is buying it from the guy. Now, Ashayla Mashiach, if you saw in Rashi, it goes both ways. Not only it's guy kind of Mashiach, is a Jew kind of Mashiach from a guy. It goes both ways. Good? So the Jew is being kaina. He went ahead and he didn't give money, but he did an act of Mashiach. He didn't give money, but he did an act of Mashiach. Yachzir. He could return it. In Mishanas and Ma'is Mashach, but if he went ahead and drew it into his rishus after he gave the money, then Yerlich Melach, he has to take that Avodah Zorah, he can't return it, and go now. If you're going to tell me a kinyan, right? Why are you returning it? How can you return it? Good, you didn't give any money yet. But again, there's only two possibilities: either kinyan kasef or kinyan mashicha. You're telling me the only game in town was mashicha. You, Ameima, holds mashicha's kaina. If Mashiach is kaina, the Jew should not be able to go ahead and return the Avodah Zarah. It's his. It's his. Ella, when you see the Jew could return the Avodah Zarah, it's b'charaya that Mashiach is not kaina. You have a right that Mashiach is not kaina. Amar Abaya, says Abaya, mishun de michse ki mekach tois. Really what Mashiach is kaina. But ever since you didn't give money yet, since you give money yet, it seems the Mashiach was Mashiach b'tois, right? Because you don't want that. Now, what the kasher is, and when you gave money, it's not. Amarava, reisha mekach tois seifel la mekach tois. In other words, either way, you don't want that avodah zarah. Whether you gave money, you didn't give money, it's like a mekach tois either way. Mekach tois, if you did Mashiach without giving money, a mekach tois what? If you give Mashiach and you did give money, right? So either way, it's a mekach tois. So that can't be the chilik between the two. El Amarava, Reisha b'seif of Mekach Tois. For Reisha d'layov zuzei, lei mischazek ha'avodas kechavim b'yad Yisrael. You didn't give any money. Now when you're giving it back, good? So you didn't give any money. You're returning it back, and the guy is not giving you back anything. However, Seifa d'yov zuzei. And now what's going to happen when you give the avodah zarah back? He's going to give you money. It seems, what does it seem like? You're selling him avodah zarah. Okay, so really, Mashiach what could be kaina. Really, right? The Yav Zuzi Mischazik Avodas Kechavim B'Yad Yisrael. Okay, so therefore, Mashiach tak is kaina. The reason why over here that it's not, it's a mekach tois, not a mekach tois. It looks like it. It's again in the Reisha. It does not look like a Jew having a guy's object. But it doesn't look like why, because when you return it, it's not a problem. Where you gave money and it's going to return the money, then it's a problem. But really, Mashiach is kaina. Now he's going to ask Rav Ashi. What did Rav Ashi say? Mashiach is not kaina. So remember, we asked on Meimar, who said Mashiach is kaina, and now we're asking on Rav Ashi that Mashiach what is not kaina. So Amalei Makashisha Braid Rav Chisla Rav Ashi. Toshma. Hamoicha yena loy bekichavim. You go ahead, Amishna. Pasak achleim Amishna. Pasak achleim madad. Damav mutarim. If you go ahead and you made a price and you didn't do an action of Mashiach, then damav mutarim, because again there was no kinyan made. It's not you set a price. You set a price. So when he does the kinyan, the guy when he does the kinyan, it belongs to who? Him. And any money he owes you, he owes you. Guys, if the Mashiach is not kaina, so it still it belonged to the Jew. If it belonged to the Jew, right, then how can he go ahead and have enough from the money? So there's a raya, that's a kashan Rav Ashi, the agdim le dinar. What happened was the guy gave him a dinar and said, we didn't set a price yet, but whatever the price is, this will cover it. So he gave it up front. He gave it up front, and since he gave it up front, then what? It's Einachinami Mashicha. What is not kaina? But he gave money up front, and since he gave money up front, it's considered his already. Ihachi ema seifa modar actually pasak dama asurim vid kadam le dinar amai dama asurim. Guys, who does it belong to? In other words, damas asurim is only when it remains by the Jew. But if you're telling me that you gave money, then it's not, then it's not the Jews. So Amle Ravashi says, "Ul didach the army mishicha by v'kavim kaina." If you tell me mishicha by a guy is kaina, amai reisha dama mutarim, the sefer dama of usurim. Why in the reisha is dama mutarim and the sefer dama in surim? In both cases, the guy was mashach before touching it. So why should it be asa? In the second case, why should it be asa? In other words, you're right. If it's speaking that he give the money, I'm asking to you, I have a problem. I have to explain why in the sefer is it asa. You also have to explain why in the sefer is asa. Once the guy did an act of mashiach in his kaina, despite the fact that he didn't have money, it's nayin nesech before what? Beforehand. Pasak, if you go ahead and set a price, samcha daite. Loy pasak loy samcha daite. Guys, what's the difference in the Mishnah? Guys, in the Mishnah, you're selling you're a wine merchant, and you're selling what? And you're selling wine. You agree on a price, and the guy does mashicha. The halacha is that it's mutter to have anah from the money. Why? Because it comes yayin nesech in the rishus of the guy. However, if you're loy pasuk, then you can't. Now, if mashicha is kainah, it should not make a difference. The difference is, in addition to the act of Mashicha, you need to have in mind that this is a done deal. If you drive out of the car dealership and you don't have the title and you didn't make your final payment yet, you may think that it's yours, but you don't really believe it's yours. Right? It's only yours when you get the title. All right. If you set a price, even if you didn't give the money yet, and he's mashach, the guy has in mind, it's mine already, and the money you have to give him is a halva. If you don't set a price, even though he doesn't act of Mashicha, that act of Mashicha is, even though Mashicha is kaina, it's not going to be kaina over there. Why? Because there's no smichas das. So in my case also, it's speaking, I gave him money up front. If we agreed on a price, then it's a good deal. If we didn't get him a price, then not. L'didinami, says Rav Ashi, afagav de kodem le'dina pasak samcha daite, le pasak le samcha daite. So he's held served by saying that what? That it's speaking where you gave him money up front. Rav Ashi, Toshma. Okay, Rav Ashi says it's not kaina. I'll prove to you that Mashiach is kaina by a guy. The Rav Chia Barabba, Rabbi Yochanan, Ben Noach nerag al pochas mishava pruta. A Ben Noach is killed on less than a shava pruta. In other words, Zayim Mitzvah Bnei Noach, as harasan zuli misasa, you don't need edim. The fact that the Torah asked them makes it asa. And one of the things what is gezela. Gezela is one of the saying mitzvah is gezel, and the chayev I feel less than a shava pruta. V'leinitin li shavain, and there's no din about shava. Rashi says because the yid is meichel on less than a shava pruta. V'yamim mashicha by v'kichavim ein a kaina. If you like Rashi says not kaina. Am I nerag? Why is he getting killed? Pishleim of his kaina, he did an act of gesela, but if he's not kaina, what act of gesela did he do? So it must be that what it is kaina. And for the Gemara, Mishum did Sari the Yisrael. He was a Mitzari Yisrael. In other words, you don't need a kinyan to be over in the mitzvah. Being over in the mitzvah is not the kinyan that it becomes yours. Being over in the mitzvah is that what? You're Mitzari Yid. That's Mitzari. That's what according to this terrace, that's what you're getting killed for. Why does it mean like nitin leishavain? Why does like nitin leishavain mean? The ena b'taris never see tav leishavain. Rashi says, guys, ena b'taris leishavain. 3 lines down. Klaimar hachanami kamar. Ena b'taris shum gezela. Gedai v'dechavim. There's no gezela of the chum because there's no kinyan. The chalecha the isya the marihu. Wherever it is, it belongs to the owner, the Jew. Vuadin l'shava pruta. The same thing would be a shava pruta. The chiddush is that he even get killed for less than a shava pruta. But in other words, once it's not kaina, it doesn't make a difference. Shava pruta more than a shava pruta, it's not kaina. So if it's not kaina, wherever it is, it's what? It's in the rishus of the Jew, right? And it's in the rishus of the Jew. And the chiyuv is that's in mitzar. He's been mitzar the Jew. Ihachi, if you're telling me, Ema Seifa, Bochaver, you're telling me that what? That he's not Kaina, and therefore he didn't do an Avera. He only was a Jew. Why would it then be if another guy steals from that guy? You're not Mitzvah Jew. You're not Kaina. So he shouldn't get killed, right? No. So if he does get killed, Zaraya, it is Kaina. Okay, good. Says when Yehachi Ema Seifa, Bochaveroi, for not Lamimenu, Schava comes and takes it from him. Neragaleha, the second guy gets killed. Bishlema Reisha Mishum Ditzaira Yisrael. So we can explain it without a kinyan. El Seifa my Ovid. Seifa he wasn't a Jew. And if there's no kinyan, he didn't do an act of Gesela. El Shmamina Mashiach Bavikavam Kaina. Shmamina. El Shmamina, you see that what? That you're Kaina. Says Rashi. El Shmamina Mashiach Kaina. Hilkach Kanya Kama. The first guy is Kaina, and you're not Chayvim Mitzayir Yid. V'hada Kanya Hai, and the second one is Kaina. V'nerag ala Gezel. V'linitin li Shavoin the Reisha. Dafka Pachas Mishava Pruta, the Yisrael Machal. V'lay Mechayv V'ikachav Madure. He's not Chayv because he's Machal. Okay, nice machlekes. Nice, beautiful Gemara. Beautiful Gemara.